So he's a market intelligence expert, a policy expert, a futurist, and an economist. And today he'll be speaking on US tariffs and how to preserve local livelihoods. Aaron?
Thank you so much for the lovely introduction, Sharice. I really appreciate it. So happy to be here today, folks, and to talk about this topic. I was very honored to ask to speak about it because I always have lots of opinions on these things. So it's such a treat when people actually want to listen. Um, let's just jump right into it. I know we want to leave lots of room for questions. Okay, so all my animations are gone. All right. Um, that's fine. We'll just look at the chart. So what I wanted to talk about was trade policy uncertainty because I think what the issue is people are really focused on the tariffs, but the message I want to leave with everybody is it's actually trade policy uncertainty, which there's an index for that is really the issue that's disrupting economic patterns. So it creates volatility in global markets. It leads to reduced investment, supply chain disruptions, and a contraction in economic activity, which hurts everybody. I don't care where you are in Canada, all of that is bad news, right? But I wanted to make clear that tariffs are just one of an example of something that contributes to trade policy uncertainty. And we're seeing others, and we'll continue to see others that are going to make these numbers go. So again, my chart got all buggered up here, but what what it should have shown was that first orange bar overlapping with the spikes that we see around 2020. So that was the first Trump presidency. And to give you an idea, this chart goes back to 1960. And this index is based on policies that are made, a lot of which by the US that affects global trade policy uncertainty. So we see, you've got Nixon and Ford, those two spikes that are not lined up, jumping up from the baseline of like 25 points to 100 points. That was considered a very big deal in the 60s and 70s. Then in the 80s and 90s, you had some spikes with Reagan and Bush. I believe the one with Reagan, or maybe it was Bush Sr., was to do with NAFTA initially because people are freaking out going, oh, what is this? But just to look at the order of magnitude, if you look at these spikes that are happening around during the first Trump presidency, where we're getting into the 250 range, very significant trade uncertainty policy. And then the most recent hockey stick growth there is just in the last couple of months where we're getting up into the 450, 500 range. We're talking more than an order of magnitude above baseline for trade policy uncertainty. Now, other things that happen here are, tariffs, sure, but we also are hearing talk of President Trump, or as I call him, the orange turd, wanting to renegotiate USMCA, what some people refer to as NAFTA 2.0. That uncertainty makes people freak out, right? Threatening to withdraw from certain trade agreements makes this chart do this, right? Putting export controls on specific technologies or goods, that makes the chart do this. Import quotas saying the US is only going to allow X amount of this good. So that affects countries like Canada a lot because we end up exporting a lot of raw materials into the US, like lumber, oil, metals, minerals, things like that. Potash, where we supply 80% of the US's potash, um, which is used for fertilizer to grow their food. So they might be putting import caps on things like that. That makes markets go woo. And then another one that really freaks people out is the unclear international policy on Taiwan. So the majority of the world's semiconductors and chips are made in Taiwan. And the US traditionally has backed Taiwan against the Chinese government to say, look, China, like if you're thinking you're going to take Taiwan, you're going to have to answer to the US. And now they've backed right off and said, it's fine. So that maybe even more so than tariffs, them basically saying we're not going to back Taiwan if China decides to roll over on it is making that spike go crazy. And it's the abruptness of these changes is why you're seeing these spikes. So, large businesses, which are yes, 94% of the businesses in Canada are small to medium-sized enterprises, like Charisse was saying. She's absolutely right. They represent, 65% of the jobs, but these large companies have an outsized influence on our GDP because they're the ones making the majority of the money. If they make big plays, they hire thousands or, lots and lots and lots of people. And so, and no one really likes chaos, and big businesses want to see their profits grow sustainably. So when they see the chart do this, they're going to be making some changes to the way they spend their money. And for rural island communities, this means, it's going to result probably in fewer customers for local businesses, disrupted supply chains, and for essential goods and increased economic disruptions. So, great, thank you. So here's what we're going to see happen in terms of impact on specific sectors of the economy. So with large to enterprise private sector, which again drives a lot of the macroeconomic stuff that happens in our economy, they're going to cut spending. They're going to start laying off workers. We've seen in the US, and the US is different than us, of course, but they've just seen in the last month the largest private sector layoff since the 2009 economic downturn. So they're laying companies are laying off people left, right, and center because they want to preserve their capital. They're going to reduce investment in equipment and infrastructure. They're going to diversify their supply chain, and that's good news if you're not in their supply chain and there's a chance you can get into their supply chain. It's bad news if you're getting a big chunk of their business because now they're going to say, oh, it's risky to have so much of our supply chain come from this one supplier. They're going to reduce their spending with small vendors, and they're going to increase prices on nearly everything because that's how they're going to make up their differences. Government it's going to get into heavy duty trade negotiations, economic stimulus measures, direct support for affected industries. I've already heard announcements from the government saying for the auto industry, for tourism, for different industries saying that they've got plans to do something to support those industries. But the downside is that all sounds good. The downside is they tend to cut any program seen as lower priority, right? So that's not necessarily good news for some of the island communities because there may be programming that on the ESG front, for example, that gets cut. I'm not saying they will. I'm just saying traditionally that's what we see as governments would see that as a nice to have, not a must have for the survival of these communities. So you might see some of those programming get cut. Definitely going to run up more of a deficit. But that's normal. I mean, every government has to do these things in those circumstances. Most importantly, though, I think the impact on the small to medium-sized enterprise on the rural islands is you're going to see higher costs for everything imported, right? For a number of reasons. I think you're going to start to see more shipping delays like we saw during COVID, right? Where container traffic moving internationally is going to be disrupted. Again, because of, we're starting to see other governments responding to the actions of other countries saying, well, we're not going to allow those ships to dock here, or we're not going to refuel those ships. And I think we're going to see more and more protectionist measures like that happening, and that is going to disrupt international supply chains. I think we're definitely going to see a decline in tourism revenue across the board because people worried about their disposable income are going to be cutting back on spending. We're going to see reduced spending by government and big businesses in these communities. And also, and this is directly for businesses that are looking to get financing, banks are going to be tightening their lending criteria because they're trying to hedge their risks as well. So they may raise the bar and say, well, if you don't have this, this, and this, we can't lend you any money. They're not the interest rates are sort of more centrally set by the Bank of Canada, and they're going to try and use that as a lever to reduce inflation. But the banks themselves can choose whatever lending criteria they want. So let's jump on to the next slide, which is, oh crap, what do we do, right? So this is I never like to just present bad news like this or scary news and then not try to offer up some suggestions as to where we could go. So let's go to the next slide. So one of the things that really works is hyper-localization of the economy. And I know that this is something most of you are already familiar with, so I don't think I'm telling you something that you haven't heard before, but it's extra important right now. So hyper-localization reduces dependence on these volatile global supply chains. It keeps wealth circulating in your communities, and it builds stronger and economic and social resilience. Now, the one thing to start with is local production and supply chains. So it does mean sometimes things cost a little bit more just because local suppliers can't always sell you things at the same price that somebody like Costco or Loblaws can. But to try to spend that money locally, buy from your neighbors. I know that this is stuff that a lot of you are already working on, which is developing small scale food production. So, community supported agriculture. I've actually met a few people today in the breakouts that are working on those kind of things. Amazing. Um, and then increasing reliance on regional fisheries, local crafts, and small manufacturing. Again, this sometimes means things are going to cost more, but it's you got to look at it as an investment in your local community. The next thing is community-owned business models. So one of the organizations I work with quite a bit is the food banks ecosystem. They're starting to talk about doing things like just cost recovery grocery stores. We're saying, look, we're going to set up a nonprofit, and you could do it as a co-op as well, to say a buyer's co-op to say, hey, we're going to buy food and dry goods at wholesale prices and then just sell it at cost to community members. So I've seen that work really well in some communities. There's also community-based financing where you've got local investment funds. Credit unions often play an important role in that. And then there's local bartering systems that, it's kind of an old school idea, but at times like this, sometimes bartering is a great way to go. I also think there's a lot that can be done around these buy local initiatives, and I've seen a lot of great stuff coming out of Island Good, which I believe is speaking on the panel right after this. But these place-based branding campaigns to boost local product demand, and again, taking advantage of this unity that we see right now across Canada, where Canadians want to support Canadians, be great to see some kind of a campaign to see, hey, you know what, us on the Gulf Islands, you can buy stuff you need from us, and we'd love to do that. So let's go to the last slide. And this slide is really about diversification and economic resiliency. So you want to try to reduce over-reliance on single industries. So if you're in a community where the main source of income is tourism, obviously the idea is to try and diversify a little bit so that that's less, and to try and create stable employment opportunities year round and enhance adaptability to certain economic shocks. So the first thing is sectoral diversification, pretty self-explanatory, but one of the things that could be looked at, and this image just to try and give you an idea, is a lot of small businesses, and the ones that Charisse and I are dealing with in the Campbell River area, they're not familiar with e-commerce, right? And it's an awfully big hill for some of them to climb to say, oh God, I got to set up my own e-commerce portal. One of the things that could be done is to say, what if a part of the sector diversification was a local, cottage industry that has an e-commerce portal where rather than having individual businesses try to figure out how to set up an e-commerce portal, is there's a central e-commerce portal for the islands to say, if you want to buy from local artisanal island companies, there's one hub you can go to. It's like the Amazon of the islands. And that's something that could be done, right? To sort of diversify the sources of revenue for where these things are coming in rather than relying on foot traffic to the islands to find you. The second area is resilient business models. So one of the things we saw during COVID and we see in other parts of the world where there's economic hardship is people transforming what they do to support what's needed at that time, right? So in this image here, we got, island repairs. But so if somebody's got a bike shop, they got tools, they've got mechanical aptitude, maybe they could be repairing other things than bikes, right? And helping make goods that are durable goods last longer and have people spend less money, but to earn some money in that business to do this. So at times like this, we tend to see a lot of need for what I call essential economy goods. So these are repair services, local food production, sustainable construction, renovations, the kind of things that are must-haves. You got to have these things continue to happen. So if there's any businesses locally that can add those services to what they're already doing, fantastic. And last but not least, infrastructure and capacity building. So I know this is something that RIEP is really good at. And I would just say I'd love to see more of that happening in the islands to help the islands get resiliency to just make sure that All of these organizations are learning how to expand their digital infrastructure to support remote work and e-commerce and to strengthen community networks. One of the things I heard in one of the breakout rooms was a comment saying some of these islands just don't coordinate super well with one another. That's an easy problem to fix, right? You guys, you're not that far apart. There's this thing called email. You could be emailing people, phone calls. So there's definitely opportunities for all of the islands to band together. But none of these things are easy to do. The best time to start these things obviously was 10 years ago. The second best time to start working on these initiatives is right now. So I think by implementing these approaches, rural island
We could
communities
do it
can
today
build a
after work.
resilient, self-sustaining economy that can weather trade policy
You're
uncertainty
most welcome.
and economic
Bye-bye.
downturns. So that is it for me. So we can go to the next slide, which I think is questions. Yeah.
Great. Thank you so much, Aaron. Thank you for such a dense and informative presentation. And we've got lots of questions going on in the chat and great discussion going on. I'm wondering if our tech team can just take off the slide and so people can see Aaron a little bit better here as I pose some questions. So Aaron, I'm just going to go in order that I've got here. There's a lot of questions here. I'm sure we won't get through all of them, but the first one comes from Max, and he asks, can you place climate change in the uncertainty chart? If it doesn't show up, why, and what does this tell us about this metric? So it's a question about climate change and how you see it playing into this.
Yeah, so climate change policy is part of that metric, but it's to do with trade, right? So typically what you would see is if a climate change policy puts a barrier or an incentive into the economy. So under the Biden administration, for example, he had some trade policies that he put into place to try and green the transportation sector, right? And that had a lot of nice knock-on benefits for the U.S. economy. It caused some international investment in the U.S. economy into battery production and into different things like this. So absolutely, you can see that in the chart. But it's not the only chart that is around. Like it is a super important chart if you want to know what's happening with the economy. But there are situations where ESG measures are not reflected in economic outcomes because we just haven't gotten to the point, I think, in most economies where those things are inextricably tied. They should be. Are they right now? No. So I think that's always a challenge is how do we loop back those external costs of not doing the right thing around ESG into these economic metrics. We have not done a good job of that to date. It's one of the things I'm hoping to tackle with my doctoral thesis when I get to it. But it's, no, it's not a nice, tight, tidy integration of those.
Right. Got it. Thank you. It's a question about Trump. What other factors, and this is from Amy LeBaron, what other factors besides Trump lead to these spikes in your chart? Is it really all about him? Just wondering, she says she's a noob at these sort of topics. So yeah, do you want to speak to that for a minute?
I mean, Trump is a symptom. Like when you have melanoma, you get a spot on your skin, right? So
Right.
there's a sickness in their country right now, and he is the melanoma spot on the forehead that tells you you have skin cancer, right? So there is a whole system behind him. Is he personally responsible? I mean, not to get into the politics of it, I think he's got early stage dementia. I don't think he's capable of making these big swings that are happening. He's got people telling him, go out on stage and say this. Done a lot of looking at who is driving his economic policies. Um, and so, this is what these policies are all reflective of is a certain philosophy in the US that says this vision of American exceptionalism that we accept and we want to move forward with looks like this. And it's screw you guys, we're taking our ball and going home. Like it's withdrawing from these international interconnectedness networks that have been developed over decades because their theory is that that's a good thing for the US. So is it all about him? No, he is the melanoma spot on the forehead.
Nice metaphor. Thank you. Paul Brent from Saturna asks, What about U.S. tourists coming here? Our money is going to a road making Canada a tourism deal. How do we handle this? Our dollar, sorry, pardon me.
Yeah. So, I mean, there are going to be what I'm seeing from a sentiment analysis perspective is there are lots of Americans who are sympathetic to what's happening to us right now, and they're going out of their way to spend money in Canada wherever possible. There are going to be other folks, probably the ones who voted for the orange turd, who will think that this is the right thing to do is to ostracize us because how dare we respond to this economic warfare that's being levied on us. So I think it really just depends on the demographics of the folks that are coming to visit the Gulf Islands, right? I mean, I suspect a lot of the visitors to the Gulf Islands are from up and down the west coast of the US. If that's the case, they're probably more sympathetic to the Canadian cause than ones that would be from the southeast or the southwest. So yeah, I mean, I think what's going to counterbalance this is one of my clients is a major travel agency, and they've hired us recently because they're trying to find ways to deal with the way Canadians are responding to travel right now. And I think we saw this during the pandemic when the border was closed and BC people couldn't go south for vacations. I mean, it just about crushed BC ferries because they weren't prepared for the volume of people that wanted to go to the islands to spend their vacation dollars. So I would suspect most of any decline that you might see in US tourism dollars is going to be supplanted by Canadians that want to diversify where they spend their tourism dollars. But I don't have a crystal ball on that, but that would be my guess.
Interesting. Well, thank you so much, Aaron. I think we're going to wrap up questions there. I'm going to